What did we do in the Middle East? It just goes on and on. They say, oh, no, this will only take a month or two. Mission accomplished. And then all of a sudden it's not accomplished. After 20 years, then they come around and saying we need to get out. That is what is impractical. If you tell the truth, it's called treason.
Ron Paul recently went on Piers Morgan's podcast to talk about how truth is treason in the empire of lies and how forever wars and foreign wars in general are destroying America. Now, at almost 90 years of age, Ron Paul makes more sense than basically every U.S. politician, maybe with the exception of Thomas Massie. He was notorious for telling cold, hard truths, even when it was unpopular to do so. So let's see him do it again, and please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
But, George Bush, when he ran for president, I said, boy, maybe he's different. That's George W. Bush. He talked about a non-intervention foreign policy. We're not the policemen of the world, and we shouldn't be doing all these things. But then Dick Cheney took over, and look at what we had. More and more wars, and they're continuing. And they're all illegal, immoral, and very destructive, because these wars should not be fought unless there's a declaration of war. So everything is unconstitutional as far as I'm concerned. But if you're not willing to spend the money on the military, that means you're not an American. You're un-American. Just look at the few that have stood their ground, what kind of heat they have to take for standing up for what is right. So,
but is it? Let me ask you. I mean, is it actually practical to have a position that America should never get involved in foreign military action? Because America does still maintain more than 50% of the world's military firepower. It is still the #1 superpower in the world. That may not be the case in a few years, but it is for now. And there are lots of fires that have to be put out. Is it really feasible to have a policy that America never gets engaged in foreign engagements?
You don't have to use that never, but not getting engaged is practical. It would have been practical that we didn't go into Vietnam when I got drafted, and my life changed because of that, my medical training and all. There was nothing practical about having a war that was unconstitutional. That would be the guideline. It's declared, that's different. And then we go and we lose 38,000 Americans.
Yeah, Ron Paul's exactly right. He talked a little bit about the beginning of this clip, about the George W. Bush administration and how Bush campaigned. He campaigned on a sensible foreign policy and against nation building, only to completely turn face on that and be the biggest nation builder that the U.S. presidency had essentially ever seen to that point. So Ron Paul is right. You know what? Republicans always campaign like they're Ron Paul, and then they govern like they're John McCain. George W. Bush was no different. We're seeing that from Trump to some extent. And he's right. These perilous wars are not only immoral, but they're also unconstitutional. They don't meet the constitutional scrutiny that you are supposed to apply when it comes to declaring them. And that's that Congress can declare war. Specifically, the founders designed the framework in a way such that the U.S. president was not analogous to an English king that could launch and declare wars at will. And that's the America we're living in today. We haven't had a war declaration since World War II, and they're not fruitful. He's talking about Vietnam now, but you can apply this to everything. Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Yemen, Ukraine, the whole shebang. The whole program's immoral. It's an empire-building scheme, and the U.S. should stay out of it. Listen to Jefferson over George W. Bush.
If we lost thousands in Korea, what did we do in the Middle East? It just goes on and on. They say, oh, no, this will only take a month or two. Mission accomplished. And then all of a sudden it's not accomplished. After 20 years, then they come around and saying we need to get out. That is what is impractical. But putting out fires, yes, that is probably going to be around for a while, and there will be some interest. But it shouldn't be done by a dictator. It shouldn't be done secretly. It shouldn't be done by, militarism and, hyping it up that this is what America's all about is coups. How many coups have we been involved in? We have overtaken. Matter of fact, the whole thing in Iran started in 1953. That's when Eisenhower and the British got together and say, well, this Mossadegh, he's elected, but he's a bum because he wants to keep the oil for the Ukraine or the Iranian. So they complain about that, but it's all the time, on and on.
Yeah, Ron Paul's right. He's right about regime change. That's what the U.S. leads on. That's what the CIA has led on essentially since its inception, from when the institution was transformed from the OSS to the CIA. When Dulles took control, he initially, just right away launched regime change operations in Iran, Guatemala in the next year in 1954, and also orchestrated the Bay of Pigs fiasco. He actually tried to assassinate Rafael Trujillo as well. We learned that from the JFK files release as well. So the U.S. has long led on regime change, and it's proven so counterintuitive historically, so much so that, the regime just looks past that and just perpetrates its war under the same playbook, under the same precepts that they did before we got into this mess. Now there needs to be a regime change again if you're a neocon or, part of the Israel lobby that wants the U.S. to be drawn into that because the government's tyrannical. Well, that's what they said about Mossadegh, and they replaced him with the Shah. Things were better to some extent for Iranians, but not for the U.S. We suffered immeasurably from that decision because it led to a reactionary element within the country seizing the government in '79, the hostage crisis, a war that the U.S. funded between Iraq and Iran, where the U.S. dumped loads of money into Iraq to invade Iran, and all the catastrophes that have spiraled throughout and since that. Now, Ron Paul's not a pacifist, and neither am I. We would be able to be willing to use military force in a defensive posture if the U.S. were attacked or invaded. That's not the wars that we're getting today. So when we say we're anti-war, we're not talking about any defensive wars that the U.S. participates in. That hasn't happened. You can justify the American war for independence, but you can't justify the war in Vietnam or the war in Iran or the war in Ukraine on these tenets.
But it was early in our history that we did that, and we caused a lot of mischief even in the peninsulas here in South American America and Central America. We've been involved and
Yeah, the U.S. couped the government of Chile and replaced Salvador Allende with Augusto Pinochet. We know how that turned out, too. Both of those regimes were despotic, but it didn't lend any favor to the American public by intervening in those matters. These are criminal vocations for those in power to embark upon without the consent of the American people, who never really vote for these wars. They're just drummed up by the CIA and Intelligence Committee and the military-industrial complex to ensure a steady flow of money to Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and Boeing and Northrop Grumman, and you know the list. And Ron Paul's pointing that out correctly, and he's always pointed that out. He's always led on the issues of war and how that affects people, because it's not just people dying. It's that we pay more via inflation that creates itself out of war because the U.S. finances it by printing more money. That acts as a tax on our wealth. It curtails our civil liberties. Look at what happened after 9/11. The Patriot Act came out. The DHS was created. The TSA now sticks their hands down the pants of grandmas and says that that's protecting you. That's garbage. And that's what we have because of these fruitless, senseless forever wars.
Still, they haven't accepted Thomas Jefferson and libertarianism. They haven't really accepted the principles of our Constitution. So I would say that is impractical.
What do you think?
Amen.
Finally is going to happen to the big, beautiful bill when it goes to the House of Representatives? Do you think it's going to get passed there, or do you think it's going to need some draconian changes to it? What do you think is going to happen here?
Something will pass, and if they can't get passed by getting it changed because they're running out of time, I think what they'll do is they'll come up with, sorry, folks, we couldn't quite do it, but we're going to give a 30-day reprieve. We're just going to have a continuing resolution so everybody feels like, we're not bankrupt. They're still sending us money because the printing presses were just, turned on. So it could be that, a continuing resolution and just limping along, or they could come up with more agreements at the last minute. But the agreements are always making the thing worse. Just think how bad the libertarians thought the House package was, and then the Republicans in the Senate, they go and make it that much worse in the tune of trillions of dollars, and they don't even budge when they say, why worry about the national debt going up to $5 trillion more? They're living in dreamland, and that's the way it works.
He's right. That's the way politics works. It's why Michael Malice says conservatism is progressivism driving the speed limit. They are always raising the debt ceiling, passing the Biden CR. This big abominable bill is designed to create $5 trillion in new debt. Massey's called the president out for that. And guess what he gets in response for that? For saying you should uphold all of the campaign pledges you made about spending and about the spirit of Doge that Americans voted for. You had a mandate on that basis, not spending. Guess what Massey got? Threats to be primaried. He got called essentially a Democrat, despite the fact that, there's not principled Democrat opposition to this spending. It's just, a political opportunity for the party not in power to oppose. And the Republicans do the same thing. Both parties are better in opposition, but they don't carry these principal standpoints throughout administrations. But Massey and Rand Paul do. There are a select few people that do. It's always called out. And the Republicans, you know what? They're always frauds. They always spend more than their Democratic rivals in subsequent administrations. Trump was no different. The CARES Act that he championed and whipped votes for was the biggest transfer of wealth from the middle class to the rich in American history. And that's what we get from these mad, Republican experiments and buying into the Republican mentality that, hey, they're just this time it's going to be different. They're actually going to cut spending. They're not. Ron Paul is right.
They live from day to day, and that's the way individuals work. It's like a credit card. People run their credit cards up. But boy, if I can get one more credit card, I can get by for another month. And that's about the way we're on a credit card. But the credit card is the Federal Reserve in its effort to print money, and it is still intact. And then we have this, to me, a ridiculous debate between Trump and the Federal Reserve on what interest rates should be. They don't have the biggest idea what the market rate of interest ought to be to make the economy move smoothly.
Right. Americans are chronically addicted to low interest rates, have been for a long time, and a lot of the economy that's been built upon it has been caused by what's called malinvestment. It's where people spend money that under normal interest rates that would be set by the market would spend. So they're propping up industries that don't deserve to be so, and this creates what's known as the boom-bust cycle. It's why we have these stock market crashes, which did happen prior to central banking, but they quickly corrected without government intervention. When we had the central banks around, then we get these long-lasting depressions that have happened beginning in 1929. And the central bank finances it, imposing the most unfair tax via inflation. Ron Paul's been fantastic about this, talking about it, making it the centerpiece of his campaigns. And for Trump to plead for central banksters to lower the interest rates when real interest rates would be, much higher than they are today, maybe 10%, maybe even higher. It's criminal because it's setting up the stage for another crash, and we know that historically they always occur.
So one argues now Trump's on the right side of the Keynesians because if this recession comes, they always lower interest rate. So I think Trump has a good feel on what's on the books, and he won't admit it. And that's why he's saying lower these interest rates, because he doesn't want to be involved in this economy turning down. So.
Right. I mean, U.S. presidents in the short term would benefit from economic numbers and how stock market appreciation occurs if interest rates are lowered. But in the end, the Americans pay the price. And that comes through depressions that happen when the market collapses due to all of this malinvestment coming to a head.
But they don't know that. It's created by, the control of interest rates, which is a big deal. And so what do these people do? They're price controllers. They would say, oh, we don't want you in office. You believe in wage and price controls. No, but they would believe in controlling the money supply. And that's the inflation rate, the value of the dollar. And that is huge.
Yeah, you get conservatives sometimes that, really preach, and correctly so, about how the minimum wage is a price control. It's the price of labor. And by setting that too low, you price out the most or too high, you price out the most vulnerable people in the populace, making it impossible for them to get jobs legally, whereas otherwise they would agree to work voluntarily with someone that wants to provide them that opportunity. And they're right about that. But then they also say, well, we should set the interest rates. That's central planning. That is a price control. It's the price of interest. It's the price of lending money and the price of repaying it. And the prices have a purpose. That's the purpose of a market economy, such that that's a signal that's not centrally planned. No one in the Soviet Union could be smart enough to plan for the prices of each and every item. And we get economic catastrophe the more central planning there is. The central banks are no different when it comes to the interest rates. The market should set the interest rates, and Fed involvement in the interest rate has been a net loss for Americans. It's made the US dollar worth about 3% of what it was in 1913. And that's pretty telling.
And it's really practically ignored. I don't think there was many hours debating the nature of good monetary policy in the last couple of weeks.
And finally, Ron Paul, Elon Musk posted on his own social media platform X on Monday, if this insane spending bill passes, the America Party will be formed the next day. Our country needs an alternative to the Democrat-Republican Uniparty so that the people actually have a voice. He's threatening there to start a new party called the America Party. What do you feel about that?
Well, I don't think much of parties, and I don't think much of political solutions. I think only about people's understanding and prevailing attitudes. And that means the prevailing attitude today is that government is to take care of us, and it's bipartisan. It hasn't been the Democrats' fault or the Republicans' fault that we spend all this money, but it's the Democrats and Republicans that voted for all the money, and they finance all the wars. They support the Federal Reserve System. They support all this stuff. It's bipartisan. So the only answer is to get a generation of people growing up and saying, why don't we try liberty? Maybe peace and prosperity can come through liberty, not by electing somebody that makes promises.
Yeah, I'm with Ron Paul on this. I don't have that much faith in the political system, though I do think that there is a lot of benefit in educating people as to the have and the realities of the nature of spending and war and corporate welfare and the dangers of the military-industrial complex. Things like that have been education campaigns leading to awakenings, at least in the remnant. The remnant is a group of people that are awoken to the truths and these realities around us. Ron Paul often spoke about the remnant and how he believes in that concept, not only in a philosophical, but also in a moral sense. And yeah, I have to agree with them, and I agree with Breitbart when Andrew Breitbart said that politics is downstream from culture. That's inevitably true, that if you win the arguments with the populace, political outcomes will trickle down from there. So Ron Paul's right on here as far as I'm concerned, and how I look at the world strategically.
And the worse the conditions, that the bigger the lies they have to make, because it's in a truth. If you tell the truth in an empire of lies, with an empire of lies, if you tell the truth, it's called treason. And that's why people who stand out now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, bucket, and are really telling the truth. And the people don't want to hear the truth, and the politicians can't stand it because they're exposed. And not only do they feel helpless, they're totally embarrassed too, and then they come up with, well, I'll just get more money for my group, and then everybody will be happy. So they wheel and deal, and it's for sale through an auction that goes on by buying and selling in these elections. And right now, I don't see anything coming of this soon.
Yeah, I had to agree. The big abominable bill did pass since this interview, and it's treacherous, just like Democratic spending was. And you can bet your bottom dollar that if a Democrat was in office, if Kamala Harris would have won the presidency, the Republicans would be complaining about this to no end. But their opposition would not be principled. Neither is the Democratic opposition now, because both parties are willing to spend your children into shackles, tightening the bonds on their shackles such that they're in debt upon birth. They're born into debt in this system that extorts the United States public for corporations, for wars, for corporate welfare, for the welfare state, and all these programs that Americans don't benefit from. So Ron Paul's right. What do you know?
I think you'd have to go back 150 years to decide when did we leave the concept of freedom and justice and sound money? Well, 1971 was a day we really knew what was happening, a day that woke me up to the point where things are going to go downhill. And gold was $35 an ounce, and now it's $3,300 an ounce, because we're going to do it. And it's going to be a lot higher than that at the rate we're doing, because there's no brakes put on this, because politically the people won't accept it.
Right on. Ron Paul is right, and truth is still treason in the empire of lies. We see it every day. Lies are the norm in Washington. Lies coat their regime propaganda, not only for their economic policy, the central planning, the redistribution apparatus, but also these perilous foreign wars that the U.S. has always plunged into with no benefits again. Ron Paul's right. In 1971, we had the end of the Bretton Woods system, when the Nixon administration had decided to disentangle the U.S. dollar from the gold standard permanently. You used to be able to exchange your dollars on demand for relative amounts of gold in accordance to how many dollars you were turning in. Well, no more. And if you look at inflation charts since 1971, you can see the value of the dollar completely tank from there. And it was depreciating already because of inflation and the Federal Reserve. But now, again, it's worth 3% of what it was in 1913. So think about how prosperous the United States and Americans are compared to other countries and other areas of the world. And that's amazing. That's, one of the best things about America. But think about this. You could be 33 times more prosperous than you were today if there wasn't inflation and a central bank. The bankers and the political class try to sell you on this notion that inflation's just the natural order of things. It's a natural law of sorts that there would be inflation, meaning that the value of your currency loses value. But that's not true. There would be deflation at times, and there has been historically, when there isn't a central bank, so your currency actually has the potential to gain in value. I know that that's an alien concept for the last few generations, especially this one, but that is true, and you could be much more prosperous as a result. So all these things are tied into each other. Ron Paul is completely right about the danger of foreign wars and spending and everything that goes into it. And he always was. He's still sharp. They said Biden was sharp as a tack, Joe Scarborough, and all those idiots that repeated that line. But here's a man that really is sharp as a tack. He's still right on all the issues and still understands them. He's, an old man that was right. And he never became president because he was right. But I want to hear what you guys say. Let me know in the comments below. Is Ron Paul right about the foreign wars destroying America? And what do you think about Ron Paul? Do you think he was a great politician and an inspiration? Let me know down below. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Please also consider becoming a YouTube member. If you do that, you will support the channel, and you also will get access to all my videos in advance of when they actually come out on YouTube. And that goes a long way to support me, and I appreciate it if you choose to support the channel in that way. Click join below if you want to do that. And also, until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. And truth is still treason in the empire of lies. Peace out, guys.